to sell the conservatives to other people that do not know and will not know what really happened at Mount Royal. And in fact, what really happened, I learned from my research into specific Israelite newspapers that are distributed in Montreal. But first, I looked at the riding of Mount Royal, which voted Liberal since our grandfathers, and perhaps even more than that. It has voted Liberal for the longest of times, consecutively. For the first time since a long, long time ago, they were about to change for the Conservatives. And I learned of who they were gonna dump to replace him with a conservative guy. The Liberal that was in and still is, he won by a very small by a small margin, was named Irwin Cutler. And I had no idea who this guy is, who this guy was, until I researched it. First, this guy was Justice Minister in the Liberal Party from 2003 until it fell. At a time where they were passing draconian laws and decrees against our families and children, because it was after 9/11. And I also learned the little information that his daughter served in the Israeli military, the IDF. Of all militaries in the world, his daughter was in the IDF. And I also learned that the Israelis of Montreal, not the Jews, the Israelis of Montreal, were the cherished children of Irwin Cutler and the Liberal Party. They gave them everything they wanted, and it was known that the Mount Royal riding was the Israeli community. That when Irwin Cutler would do something in the Mount Royal riding, it probably had something to do with the Israeli community. The two were mostly equal. But not only that, Irwin Cutler is also an international expert on anti-Semitism, meaning that he sits on his high chair at tables full of, in quote, important people, and gives a speech and denounces anti-Semitism. And he even wrote some new articles denouncing the new forms of anti-Semitism on the internet and elsewhere. Obviously, he's an Israeli propagandist. But he gave them everything they wanted. And in one article, it said that the Israeli community was voting conservative because of the promises of Harper regarding Israel. And they called it Hakarat Atov, the, in quote, old Jewish principle of gratitude. Harper offers them things on Israel. Basically, Harper offered them a few things more than the liberals were offering them. The liberals were already giving them everything they wanted But for a few dollars more, a few cents more, a few little more promises by Harper, the liberals don't exist. Irwin Cutler, flushed down the drain, thrown into the garbage can. We don't know who you are. Hakarat Atov, gratitude. Oh no. Oh no. And there was a fascinating picture of Irwin Cutler the next day in the Israeli newspaper, because most of the information that I found regarding this, I found in local Montreal Israeli newspapers. I was quite amazed to see that to them it is all in the open. That if you were to go to them and talk about everything I talked about right here, they would give you honest answers. It is not a secret. The secret is elsewhere. The secret is where I live, in Power Corporation newspapers and TV. They are in Quebecor, the Pierre-Carl Pelado newspapers. But in your case, it's also your own newspapers, your own medias that do not communicate to you this information. Because if you open an Israeli newspaper and start reading what's in it, I was informed very quickly as to what is going on there. And there was a picture of Irwin Cutler in the Israeli newspaper with his crew when they were counting votes, as it happens with every politician or politician wannabe. At election day, he gathers with his team. He sits down to look at the votes, especially when there's going to be a surprise or they think they might be elected. And in the case of Irwin Cutler, it was written below, he was looking in disbelief. He did not believe that despite everything he did for them, remember, he was justice minister from 2003 until the Liberal Party fell and passed all kinds of draconian laws. The Israeli community were his cherished children. His daughter served in the IDF, and he was an international expert on anti-Semitism. He almost got thrown in the garbage can. He won 16,000 to 14,000. And the reason why they were flushing him is because Harper promised them more on Israel than the Liberal Party. And the way it worked politically is that they the conservatives tried to recreate in Montreal what they had already successfully created in Toronto and possibly elsewhere, where they went to Toronto, found a member of the Israeli community that was presentable as a politician, that already had a certain influence in that community. For example, someone with connections to B'nai Brit. And they told that person, and it happened in Toronto like that. They told that person, present yourself for the conservatives, and the guy is an Israelite. Present yourself for the conservatives because it would be in your interest to do so, because we're giving you everything on Israel. If the conservatives get in power, one way or the other, with or without you, we just want you to help us get in power, because it is also in your interest to do so, we will give you everything on Israel. And they went to Montreal, and the person that they found is Soli Zashdel, who is an Orthodox Jew, but then again, strike the word Jew. And even I don't like the word Zionist. I prefer calling them Orthodox Israelites. And Soli Zashdel presented himself as the conservative guy and almost won. And in the Israeli newspapers and elsewhere, everyone knew that the reason that that they were voting conservative was for Israel. They said it. The hot topic of discussion in the Israeli community was the economy? No. Was illegal people that come here? No. Was the police state? No. Israel. It was the only topic that was discussed. Harper promises more for Israel. We will help the conservatives. We will be with him. And Soli Zashdel even mentioned this on his YouTube account. That Harper promised them more on Israel than any other so-called leader in the world. That he went further than either George Bush or Barack Obama or anyone else in his promises regarding Israel. And the rest was laughingstock. You can watch the videos of Soli Zashdel on his YouTube account talking about the economy and the need for more prisons. He's almost laughing when he talks about these, because he knew that to help the conservatives and get what he wants and what the Israeli community wants out of this, he would have to deblatterate the idiocies of the conservative party, of the platform. So there are some videos, I believe in a strong economy, and he's saying garbage. And so I wish you to vote for the conservatives. I mean, it's a joke. It's a joke to him. It's a joke to anyone that watches these videos. But there's also another video that advocates the need for security. But of course, that's not for them. That's for you. They are selling you Harper and tyranny and the police state, not to themselves, but to you and to your families and to your children. And you will say, but it was not a majority of them, since they did not succeed. Well, I will answer that the Israeli community is not the entirety of Mount Royal. And in the Israeli community itself, the number that I got, and I think it was from Erwin Cutler that mentioned it himself after the election in an Israeli newspaper, was that 75%, and I do not know whether this number is official or not. The official number certainly interests me. I would like to know it. The number that he mentioned was 75%. 75% of the Israeli community voted for the conservatives. So it was not a minority. It was not a slim majority. It was not 50+1. It was a large majority that voted conservatives, completely counterculture with the rest of Quebec. that the conservatives and his tyranny does not present is not appealing to people in Quebec. And I will not say that the house of resistance of Quebecers is 2 meters of reinforced steel. It's more like a house of cards that the conservatives are trying to blow into. If you blow hard enough, the house of cards might fall down. But it is still holding up to a point because the conservatives got a majority everywhere else in Canada except in Quebec, where they barely got very, very few people elected. And completely counterculture, the Israeli community almost brought the conservatives of all places in Quebec in the middle of Montreal. And there was also a very interesting quote in one of these Israeli newspapers, because it mentioned that it is well known in the community, and it is not me saying this, it is their own newspaper saying it. It is well known in their community that they are known to punch higher than their hate. Meaning that they can lift more than their own weight. Meaning that they are overrepresented. Because you have to realize that the Montreal Israeli community consists of what? A few thousands of people? Yet their political weight is not only a few thousands, but like 10 million in a population of 30 million. So they lift more than their own weight, they punch higher than their own hate, they are overrepresented, and they know it themselves. To them, it's not a secret. If you go in the Israeli community and ask them and talk to them about this, they will give you very honest answers. And this political weight and their political activism is opposite to the image that they present of themselves, or the image that we perceive them to be. Because they look like people that mind their own business. And in my life, I learned to respect people that mind their own business. I learned to also mind my own business. And I like Montreal because of this. I myself live in Montreal. And if you were to tell me what's the biggest advantage of living in Montreal or living in a big urban area, I would answer the anonymity of it. That people mind their own business. But in their case, it is a false image. It is a false perception. Because they are more like people that wear a dark cloak and hide a dagger in this cloak. Are these people minding their own business, or are these people looking not to mind their own business when they have a dagger within their cloak, ready to open the cloak and stab you with it, and your families and your children that by bringing tyranny where you live, by bringing the Harper tyranny where you live? And you would say, well, they would also be affected by this. My answer would be, if it ever gets to the point where society is turned into a total police state toilet, I mean, already much beyond what it is already, then these people can simply say, well, this place is a dump. This place is a garbage can. Let's go back home. Let's go back to Israel. And they already obtained everything they wanted about Israel. So when this place becomes unlivable, well, let us go back to our land, Israel. And I saw the percentage in the Montreal Israeli community of people that have taken trips to Israel. And this percentage was very, very, very high. Especially because in the Montreal Israeli community, there is a billionaire, maybe more, that participates financially in bringing the Israelis of Montreal to Israel. He pays the expenses, and so the percentage is quite high. And these people also seem to be protected by all forms of criticism. That they can do anything they want, you cannot criticize them. But when they vote for Harper and bring the Harper tyranny where I live and take side with the tyrants and the destroyers to destroy our families and our children, I say your protection, your armor just fell to the ground. And this armor is the Holocaust. And you were taught to have pity for the survivors of the Holocaust, but the Israelis in general because of the Holocaust. And obviously this pity is used against you. There was a rabbi recently arrested in Israel, and it made somewhat of a scandal, I guess. And they quoted that rabbi as saying that you should not have pity toward your adversaries, and that the IDF should crush all. They are our soldiers. They will crush the enemy, and you should have no pity, because it is written in the Talmud or another one of their texts. And I thought the phrase was interesting in itself. But of course, when issued by an Israeli idolater, that phrase gets perverted very much so. But by itself, that you should not have pity toward your adversaries is very interesting in itself. Because once you have pity toward people that are trying to do bad things to you, then they will use that pity to further their agenda. And that is what is happening right now with the Israeli communities. And I don't think that the Israeli community living next to where I live is much different than, say, in Toronto, but also elsewhere in the world. And as I say, the source of that pity is the Holocaust. But then you would think that because of the Holocaust, these people would be at the front line of the resistance against Harper, against tyranny. No, not only are these people not at the front line of resistance, they are at the front line of bringing me tyranny. And from that point on, I look even at Holocaust survivors in a very different way. That even them, as they parade themselves trying to get pity for them, there might not be anything more than them looking for pity. And if I were to ask them, who did you vote for at the last election? And their answer would be, I voted for the conservatives. My answer would be, eat shit. My answer would be, beep you. And my answer would be, mange de la merde, pis va chier. And I want you to ask yourself that question. What are these Israeli communities bringing to your society? Are they bringing something positive? Or are they bringing nothing? And bringing nothing in itself could be acceptable. Because it could mean that they are minding their own business, which is certainly the image that is projected to you, or that is perceived by you. These people don't bring anything because these people are self-sufficient. They mind their own business, they do their own thing, and how not to respect people that mind their own business? I'm way too busy dealing with people that do not mind their own business. But no. It's not whether they bring something good or nothing at all, but whether they bring something negative to your society. In my case, their Harper tyranny certainly qualifies as something negative. And that is an understatement. But this small Israeli community of Montreal, of thousands of people, do not merely operate at the federal level, as I learned, and everything here I say is new to me. I was not aware of any of this until the last Canadian election. They also operate at the provincial level. And I learned that through generous donations to the Provincial Liberal Party of Quebec, they buy themselves a seat as minister. And in Canada, there is the Prime Minister Harper, Prime Minister Jean Charest, both at the federal and the provincial levels. And the people under them, the heads of departments, are called ministers themselves. They're not prime ministers, but they are ministers. And they buy themselves a minister at all times in the Liberal Provincial Party. And at one point, there was a perception in the Montreal Israeli community that the Liberal Party of Quebec would be punished because at one point they did not give a seat of minister to any departments to their representative. That he gets elected over and over again, and he always ends up with a position of minister. meaning that he always has an influential position in Quebec politics. And again, you have to realize that these people are a small clique of people, a few thousands of people. And that's what they mean by punching above their hate. That's what they mean by being not only a little, but extremely overrepresented. That this small clique of people is like countless millions of people. And they can never have enough. Because they were already the cherished children of Irwin Cutler and the Liberal Party, who were already saying, screw the rest, let's give everything to these small Israeli communities. You are number one. You count. The rest, screw them. And then for a few dollars more, Liberal Party, Irwin Cutler, in the garbage can, we go with Harper. Even more fascinating in the Israeli community, where they were promised things in exchange for their votes and in exchange for piercing in Montreal and in Quebec that were not related to Quebec or Canada in any way. They were being promised things on Israel by Harper. And there was a fascinating quote by Irwin Cutler after he won the election by a slim margin, almost losing. He said Israel can be an electoral issue, but must not be the only electoral issue, which I believe was his way as saying this must not go on in history as an election that was only about Israel, which it was. Connect this with the video from Cynthia McKinney that is on YouTube. If you type Cynthia McKinney and pledge, you will fall on a video by her that explains how the United States politicians are owned by Israel through funding. And funding does not exist. Giving free money does not exist. When you receive funding, you are bribed. We buy something from you and you take money in exchange for what we buy from you. And so the politicians getting funding, which is basically most, if not all of your politicians, had to sign a pledge of allegiance to Israel to enforce their military superiority and so on. But again, the word that comes back here is Israel. Why are we all talking about Israel all the time? It is because of their passion for Israel. The passion of who? Of the Orthodox Israelis. And the problem with this passion, and in itself, it is not a problem. You can be passionate about certain things. But when this passion arises all kinds of evil desires in you, and that you engage in all kinds of evil in order to satisfy this passion, then this passion